Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Eric Worth. I am the VP of Operations here at StatusCast, and I'm excited today to talk about how we can cut through the noise, cutting through observability chaos with automated incident management. Now, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, so if you do have any questions while I'm speaking or at the end, please feel free to send them in and we will answer them. For most organizations, the amount of observability noise we hear can be deafening. From third-party status page changes to internal health pings, the amount of data we receive makes it difficult to keep our heads straight during unplanned outages. StatusCast Beacons, which act as third-party connectors, streamline your incident management process, simplifying complexities and reducing inefficiencies that exacerbate downtime and tank IT productivity. StatusCast is built to help IT departments thrive during incidents. Now, overall, there are three types of beacons that StatusCast offers: third-party status page, observability, and ITSM. StatusCast harnesses the power of third-party status pages for comprehensive data aggregation. As modern businesses have grown more and more dependent on SaaS providers, a status page that can aggregate all of these external status pages into a single source of truth is critical. This can become extremely handy for IT engineers who are used to going to 30 different places to get an idea of what the current status of their stack is. Introducing one page to show them everything at once will make life drastically easier. Now, the observability and ITSM type of beacons will both allow us to accept any type of JSON data in whatever format you want to send to us. We can create custom variables and rules, and we can utilize your data for logical actions and to create messaging. Beacons can also have escalation policies assigned that will deploy notifications to key team members based on specific incident rules. Our goal overall is to set up proactive incident management, which means we're triggering predetermined workflows, we're automatically assigning incidents based on those workflows, and we're even helping to manage your team so that the right person is in the know when an incident occurs. And to top it all off, how do we keep those people in the know? StatusCast can send out notifications via email, SMS, Slack, MS Teams. Really, wherever your team operates, we can ping them to let them know that an incident is there and that they need to do something. We've talked a lot about beacons so far, and I'd really love to transition to show you a live demo of how they work. Now, most of what we do with beacons is going to be handled from the administrative portal of StatusCast. So from my page here, we're going to first go to the beacons main section. Now, this is where we'll see all the pings related to our account. We can see all of my historic ones listed here on the right. Now, from here, we want to click the settings button, and we'll go into the settings page for all of my beacons. This is where we can see all the ones we have created already, as well as add additional ones. Now, out of our three types of beacons, I'd like to first talk about the third-party status page beacons. For this example, let's go into my AWS created one, and we'll see how simple these are to configure. As mentioned before, these are coming from pre-populated public status pages. So to add this, all I had to do was create the connector for AWS, and then simply come in here and select the components that are relevant to me from AWS's page. Our goal is to really simplify your page and to bring everything together into a standard format. So while these pages will have their own hierarchies for components, we allow you to ingest it and to make it part of StatusCasts. So in this example, AWS, perhaps I have something hosted in their US East region, and I am concerned with their A4B, ACM, and AppMesh and AppStream 2 products. So we've selected these components, and this is where StatusCast will create ones directly within our account for them. And if we switch to the status page real quick, one cool thing about these third-party status page components is that we do denote that they are a little bit different than the ones that you've created directly. This allows you to, on the status page, potentially call them out. We have a lot of clients who like to segment these third-party ones to let people know, hey, this is the stuff that's kind of running our infrastructure, but it's not being run directly by us, versus maybe the items that are being directly run by us. Just because I've separated them on these two widgets doesn't mean you can also combine them. If we scroll a little bit further down to my grid, we can see I have them represented here in one list. How you display it to people, the order, the hierarchy, as usual with everything in StatusCast, that is up to you. So there's a lot of flexibility you have. But in terms of managing these integrations, it's extremely simple. As I said, we simply have to collect the components that are relevant to us, and then we can tell StatusCast, do we want to automatically publish this? This is a big one that some people do like to consider because it is an event coming from a third party. Depending on the audience of your status page, you may not want these just automatically pushed out as soon as they're received, especially if this is a status page that might be served for customers and not your internal stakeholders. We may want there to be a few checks and balances in this case. Now, the other types of beacons that we have, really the ITSM and observability that we mentioned earlier, I want to walk through an example for each. Let's start with Pingdom. Pingdom is a great classic observability example. You'll note with this type of beacon that we were given a webhook URL. This is where we want you to send your Pingdom data to. Now, all of these integrations, whether it's observability, Pingdom, or New Relic, or ITSM like a PagerDuty or Grafana or ServiceNow, all of these systems are going to operate off the same general idea that once they detect something, they want to alert someone. And StatusCast simply just needs to be part of that chain of someone's where we're ingesting your data. From there, we can scroll down and we can see some rule set evaluations that we can define in StatusCast. So beacons are always going to be controlled by what we refer to as an overall rule set. And the first thing we want to do within a rule set is set some additional conditions that we want to monitor. So we're dealing with JSON data, which means I got an object. The way we control this notation is called XPath. So I'm always going to say $dot, and then I want to pick the object that we want to consider. Now, in this case, my rule set's pretty simple. I want to really rely on Pingdom telling me what the current state of my check is, and I also want to know what check it was that it's actually reporting on. Now, we can make some considerations here. Does this check name or current state maybe contain a specific value or equal something specific? In my case, it's going to be pretty simple. I just want to make sure that I got some sort of data in these objects. As long as we do and we pass this initial rule set, we can then proceed to all these types of actions that StatusCast can take. Now, this is important to note that not everything is about creating an incident. We might want to do something internal, such as assign it to a team or maybe a user. I'll talk a little bit more about that in our next beacon example. Let's keep this one pretty straightforward. I want to really focus on three primary actions. The first is extract components. This may be one of the most important ones that we can look at. This is the idea that StatusCast wants to know which property in your incoming data can it relate to components. Now, components in StatusCast are generally how we're kind of representing on the status page what's being tracked, what is there a status against, and this is important because you might have 1,000 different checks in Pingdom being monitored, and as a result, you may have 1,000 different components in StatusCast being monitored as well. Does that mean you have to create 1,000 different beacons? Absolutely no. You should be able to create one beacon to rule them all in this case. And this is how we do it. Telling us that, hey, the check name property is going to be related to the components in my account lets us do one of two things. We can either take that check name and look at the names of your components. So if we real quick go to my actual status page and scroll up here, we can see I have a number of named components, things ranging from applications to web app to caption maker to CA2. So if I got a ping saying CA-2 is down, this is a friendly name I can go off of. Now, if this is a name that I might not want shown to my end users, maybe I want something prettier shown up front, we can also piggyback off of what StatusCast calls external IDs. So we can look at either and make that evaluation. But the important thing here, and let me get back to my right tab, is that we can easily identify which piece of data is actually being correlated to components. This will be important because when we create an incident, we're always going to have to know what is impacted. This is additionally important because, again, if we're tracking 1,000 different things within Pingdom, Pingdom could be telling us data about several different components within the course of a day. So different incidents could occur at different times, and this is how we'll keep track of all that, simply because we know what component has been impacted. Now, create an incident is another common action that we would want to see out of here. And again, the workflow here is very straightforward. For this type of rule to proceed, I first want to make a condition. So what is my current state? Is it currently down? This is the case where Pingdom's telling me something new has gone down. So this is a pretty simple rule set here. We can make this as complicated or as basic as we'd like. Again, this is all going to come down to your own directive for workflows and depending on the data that we're being dealt with. So mine is pretty simple. If it's down, then I want to go ahead and consider creating a new incident. There are some additional properties here we can take into account. You want StatusCast to maybe wait a couple of minutes before we do anything with this. Great for observability platforms where you might be dealing with false positives. If there is just a blip on the map or something down for a minute, you may not want us to do anything. So maybe tell us to wait 5 minutes. And then if we do get that kind of up ping within that time, we can just bail out of what's going to occur. The other properties in this are going to be just simply properties of the incident itself. When we create this incident, what's the title that you want us to use? You could use something static, or in this case, you can see I actually have macros being pulled out of that JSON. So again, I want my check name to be included in the title. We can scroll down here. My message is being kind of formatted with this. We could always apply a template as well. We can make decisions around that as well. And again, if we scroll down here a little bit further, we can see some of those other actions. So similarly, for update incident, I want to check, hey, is Pingdom telling me now that this thing is up? If that's the case where it's up, then we'd want to go ahead and set the status to available, maybe use a static message. And then lastly down here, I can also make some decisions about maybe notifications. So depending on the type of data that I'm getting, I might want to make a decision about, and this is not something that's critical. Maybe we just want to send out an email for it versus, hey, the severity of this is high. I want to send out emails and SMS. I want to light up everything I can. These are all decisions you get to make based off of your data. No two organization runs incident management the exact same, and we really want to support that flexibility at the end of the day. So let's go ahead and minimize these for real quick. Now, as I was talking through this, I actually had Pingdom send through a ping for us so we could see what this looks like in real time. Let's switch tabs real quick to my Beacons main section here. And we're just going to go back real quick into the main Beacons page. And we'll see here in my waiting section on the left, I have something popped up. It came up about 8 minutes ago. We can click into this single ping. And here we'll be able to see the timeline of things that have occurred. Now, this happened about 8 minutes ago. So we can see here the time it got listed. It did also create an incident. So from this workflow, because my rules did create an incident, I can see there is an incident linked here. We can go into this directly. We can see everything that kind of happened here. There was SMS and email sent out. It affected my component called websites. We could go to the page real quick and again refresh this, and we'll now see my websites component is showing up as unavailable. So all these action occurred without a user having to do a single thing because the workflow predefined it for us. Coming back into the page, let's just go back to my main beacon ping that we got about this. And just give us 1 second. So again, we can see here related to the beacon a couple other things that happened as well. I have a content, so this actually lets me go and see what was sent in. And as we noted, current state was important in my rule set because I wanted to know when it was up or down. And I also wanted to know a check name, which again, in this case was websites. So mine's pretty easy. I have the same named check as I do a component on the site. So we were able to very cleanly and correctly kind of link those two together. Now, this is a pretty simple beacon example. As we looked at, Pingdom is sending us a relatively simplified bit of JSON, and there really is not a whole lot of kind of rule sets around here. What we can do is look at an example that goes a little bit further than this. This example is for PagerDuty, which can be configured to send a little bit more of a custom payload depending on what we have integrated. Similarly to the observability example with Pingdom, we can see that this also generated us a webhook URL. So just in the same way, we want to receive data from PagerDuty to a specific address. You can see here, I also have an escalation policy set up. One thing we didn't really look at in the last beacon screen is the idea of kind of moving a beacon ping from when we get it from the waiting stage to acknowledge to completed. And I want to show that off with this example a little bit more clearly. We scroll down, we can also see I have a couple of variables set up here. So variables are a nice thing to use within beacons when we start to see more complex objects. You can see PagerDuty sends me an array, and it's got kind of some depth here. This might be annoying to copy and paste and use all over the place. It might be a lot easier if I had kind of a friendlier name I could reference within the rules. These let us kind of take the values of data just again for that kind of that ease of use, but we can also do some stuff with this data as well. So I have a simple kind of transform example here where PagerDuty, it sends me escaped new lines as \n. And for the purposes of my status page, I deal with HTML. So I want to replace any \n for a new line with the line break kind of HTML that we would expect to normally see. So this just lets us, clean up some data that we might not have control of. Some systems are just going to send out the version of which they have. So this just rest assured you can kind of mess with the data a little bit as well to kind of get it in the format if it's not already in a usable format for you. You'll also see this beacon has a couple extra things just checked off. So in this case, I do want it to be assigning to a team. Teams can be set up where we are, going off of maybe a time of day, which is how I have this set up. Or again, we can always make rules around the data. So, maybe if a ping came in and I can identify that a DevOps team over a standard support team maybe needs to be assigned, we can kind of make conditions around that as well. That's really up to you. That's the beauty of these logical conditions we can set. Same thing with users, again, if it's a particular user that we want to assign here, like a manager or an MVP, if you wanted to bypass a team, we can do that as well. And we'll show this off on the beacon ping as well. One other thing about this rule that will look a little bit different is we scroll down, you'll actually see there's a second rule set here entirely. Now, we find this often with systems where we're dealing with a little bit less standard JSON, PagerDuty, Datadog, Grafana, ServiceNow. You have a lot of flexibility in those types of systems to say, what do I want to send to StatusCast? And again, this is what makes a system like this so cool and usable, is that, again, you're in control of this. So in this case, the way that PagerDuty is resolving events for me is just kind of a different enough from the standard data that I'm getting that I want just to have a simple second rule set that's only evaluating that. So I'm looking for a particular top level status value, and if that is met, then I would want to simply come in here and update the incident. So these can get pretty complex where, again, if you have systems that are, again, just kind of handling sometimes very different formats, but it's all kind of within the same context of the same event or the same incident, you can have StatusCast evaluate different types of rule sets. So you can imagine these can get pretty complicated if you're dealing with very complicated data, but just as I showed you in the previous example with Pingdom, at the end of the day, it can be very simple as well. The takeaway is really just that, no two incident management processes are going to be done the same between organizations. So we want to support this flexibility. Now, if we go back to my beacons page real quick, again, we'll see that I sent through a PagerDuty example. I just want to show off a couple of the extra things within here that we didn't talk about the last section. So when we load this up, we'll see a couple things here. Note here that we have a beacon escalation. Whenever we are assigning this to team members, we have this concept of being able to acknowledge the ping. So this tells StatusCast, hey, somebody has actually come in and they have reviewed this and they have clicked acknowledge. This tells us that within the escalation policy, somebody's looking at it. We don't need to keep bothering people up the chain. And you can see that that was just added into my timeline very quickly there. We can also see to the right here, I've assigned to a team based on my schedule. My team A is operating during the day. Team B is operating overnight. And then again, I had chosen to assign this directly to myself as well, which means that I got an email from the email, SMS. And again, if we're using things like Slack or MS Teams, we would potentially be getting notifications in there as well. However, this again, from the original example, the idea here is that we created an incident. We have the content that is referenceable. And as a user within the organization, I might be able to maybe drop a note in here. Hey, I got this one. So we can use this timeline here to pass messages to individual users so that if somebody else, maybe my manager came in to check this, they'll see, hey, Eric said at 12:35 that he's got this one. So we'll let him go ahead and close out this event. And if we come back to the main beacons page as well, you'll just note that there are a couple stages that these beacons kind of sit in. We want to show this off real quick. So the beacon rule set can also move these things from waiting to in progress to complete. Now, naturally, since I went ahead and acknowledged that, this one would probably be best served to be moved into waiting. And then again, that just allows us kind of from a management perspective to see the flow of how things are getting handled. Once I've maybe initially dealt with this one and it's been completed, we might be resolving it manually, or maybe my work with this initial ping is over and I can move it over to complete, in which case we would simply be waiting for the follow-up ping to tell us that something has been completed. And speaking of follow-up pings, you may have noticed that I just had this other one pop in here. This was from my beacon example for pingdom. I had it go ahead and clear out itself. So if we actually go to the status page now, we'll see that this has been reset to normal. So you can start to get the idea through these pingdom, through these beacons, how we can really let you control the workflow, the data that you're dealing with as an organization. We're not going to force you into a cookie cutter with it. If you're using things like ServiceNow, Grafana, Datadog, where you are really dealing with your own format, StatusCast can support it at the end of the day. It's just all about us being sent the data and being really told what to do with it. Now, I hope this webinar has started to give you an idea of how you might be able to use StatusCast Beacons for your own organization. The ability to centralize all this sort of data into one area where you're in control of the workflow, we have come to find is just really invaluable for a lot of organizations. And I'd love to hear some feedback. And again, any questions that you might have or you were saving towards the end, please feel free to submit them into the chat now. And we'll certainly be answering the questions. Thanks.